Hello and welcome to Angel's Costumes Behind the Scenes. I'm Jeremy Angel.
I'm Richard Green.
And I'm Jonathan Littman.
This week we are going to be talking to Andrew Hunt, who is a costume supervisor and has been working in the industry for many years now. He's been costume supervisor, wardrobe supervisor, and a dresser as well as that. And he is the first supervisor we're actually going to speak to. It was a really interesting conversation with him about a role I don't think many people know too much about, which is the supervisor.
I think you're right. And it's interesting, he actually gives us a definition, doesn't he, the difference between a wardrobe and a costume supervisor.
Yeah, I'd never actually had someone sort of do it so clearly, which was really, really good, depending on the budget as well. But I found it really interesting when he does explain the difference between the two, because I even think at times we sometimes get confused. Are we dealing with we just think it's the supervisor rather than saying costume or wardrobe?
I think so much depends on the scale of the production that they're employed in terms of how their job title determines the role, not just in terms of production and how much involvement or not they have with budgets and staffing.
Yeah.
Jonathan, on your theatre productions you've done, theatre doesn't really have a supervisor.
No, the costume supervisor in theatre is ostensibly your associate stroke assistant as well as the supervisor. So they are the bridge between you as the designer and production in terms of wardrobe within the theatre once the show is up and running.
So would that be different then to wardrobe mistress or master then?
Wardrobe mistress and master tends to be the person that is within the theatre maintaining the show.
Yeah, okay, fine. So that's the difference. So they'll probably be attached to a specific theatre and they'll look after productions when they come in to that theatre, whereas your assistant as a designer will be the person that will be supervising the overall look of the production when it starts and starts to run.
Yes, yeah, until the point of opening. So the costume supervisor tends to be employed during rehearsal,
right,
during tech, during the previews. Show opens, costume supervisor then gets called in if there are cost changes or costume issues that the designer doesn't need to be involved with. And they have quite a responsible position because it's, in theory, they are the go-to person.
And presumably they're the bridge as well, aren't they? Bridge between you and production sometimes. I mean, I know you deal directly with production, but they are a sort of an extension of you and taking some responsibility. That sort of, I'm not going to say the word mundane. Well, I'm going to say the word mundane, but I don't mean mundane. But that sort of day-to-day stuff that I'm not going to say mundane. Well, you just did, you So in Opera Holland Park, and we'll be talking to James Cutton later on in this series, somebody like Sage Robinson, who is in with us working, setting up the shows, is the costume supervisor, and then the people that actually run it on a every evening basis and get them dressed and get the shirts and things washed afterwards. That's the wardrobe mistress stroke master.
Yeah. And Sage will have a pivotal role because she will be dealing with the designer's vision, and then she will be the practical, what actually gets on stage and how it works within the action.
Yeah, because the big difference really, I suppose, between talking to you as a designer and dealing with other designers is that you're they may not like me saying this, but you're far more budget conscious and aware of the, if you like, the financial implications of putting on a production because of who you are and what you do with us, whereas a designer quite often is interested in the overall look and the concept and everything else, and perhaps slightly less concerned about the cost. Is that fair?
I think that's it's an observation, but the point is that most designers in the UK that are working within theatre tend to be set and costume as opposed to just costume or just set.
Right.
And what that means then is that in terms of the detail of budget, that tends to get left when you are designing both sections, tends to get left to the supervisor or whoever the equivalent is within the set department. It's just because I am the costume designer that I am all over my budget as well as the logistics of how everything gets to stage.
Gotcha. Good.
So my supervisor tends to be my assistant as well as the supervisor, because I draw them into the world of design as well as the world of supervision.
I think that what will come out over several of the interviews that we're going to do with different supervisors is that no supervisor really works the same way, and at least that's my impression. They've got the same job, but their approach sometimes seems to be different depending on the person. But also the roles that the supervisors do can also differ in the sense of Andrew, who we're about to listen to, works on a lot of different productions and with a lot of different designers. But supervisors, some people might be surprised to know, some supervisors follow designers, as it were. Is it because the designers are so comfortable with them, or it's just the good relationship that they have?
It is about relationships, but it's also about timing. And I think most of our practitioners, when they are talking about their job, whether it's Sandy or Susie in film, it's inevitably about the timing and being in sync. And of course, you always want to have your favoured team around you, because that's what moves everything forward and is, I would imagine, 80% of the challenge is being able to be in sync with everyone that you're working with to the common end. And, we'll discover when we talk to Christopher Oram in a couple of weeks' time that, he as a designer, in terms of creating costume and set, relies heavily on a unique bunch of individuals, of which the supervisor is key, to realise his vision for the piece and move it forward, always moving it forward. And he may at any one time have any number of projects, whether it's revivals or new production, and he's juggling between all of them, and his very carefully selected teams who know him well are doing the same thing in their world.
Yes, and there is no one size fits all, is there, for all of this stuff?
No.
We hope you've been enjoying the episodes so far. We are really enjoying all the feedback we're getting and comments people are sending our way. If you would like to follow us on social media, we are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're just /costume podcast, or you can visit our website, which is www.angelsbehindtheseams.com, or you can email us at podcast@angels.co.uk. And here is my conversation with Andrew. Today I'm joined by Andrew Hunt. Andrew has had many roles in the costume industry over the years. He is now, I work with him predominantly as a costume supervisor. I've worked with him on several productions now, and he's worked on many productions, large, small, and film, TV. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Nice to chat to you.
It's lovely to talk to you. And what we'd like to do today is just get a feel for what you do in the costume industry, what you do on a film set, and where you came from, and basically what a supervisor is. I don't think there is such an easy thing to be able to turn around and go, well, a supervisor is X. I think every supervisor is different. Every job has a different type of supervisor. At least that's my feeling from working with everyone. But for a very simple question, how did you train to be a supervisor? How did you get to where you are today?
Well, I originally trained at drama school, at Mountview Theatre School, in design and technical theatre. And I started my costume career back in 1989 when I was a dresser at the RSC in Stratford. So I worked there 8 shows a week in the evenings and matinees. And then during the day, I worked at the RSC Costume Hire department. So I was there for 7.5 years. I mean, that gave me a great training in dealing with actors and learning about the history of costume. So, anyone starting out in this business, I would definitely recommend spending some time working in theatre. Because apart from the fact that the money's terrible, which means you have to have a great passion for doing it, which I think is very important. And it gives you a grounding in theatre. You can learn so much from your peers and from being in quite often stressful situations with quick changes, etc. You have to be able to act quickly if anything goes wrong. And then I was also designing a lot of fringe theatre sets and costumes in London during those 7.5 years, and ended up designing a show in the West End in 1997. So after 7.5 years at Stratford, I thought it was time I should probably give up dressing and move to London. But having moved to London, the film work took over. So I don't think I worked in the theatre after that, which is a shame, and I really miss it. But again, I really can't afford to. So I probably did a good 15 years as a costume standby before my first job as a wardrobe supervisor, which was on the last 2 Harry Potter films.
And by a standby, you mean the people who work on set, dressing the characters, making sure the costumes, once they come onto set and on camera, are ready and they look correct and the actors are dressed correctly?
Yeah. So basically, you come in the morning, depending on the show. If it was a really busy film with lots of story days, so hence lots of costume changes, you'd probably get the costume in the morning because everything's always last minute. Get your actor ready, depending on how many actors now, but in my day, it was tended to be like 2 standbys. So I would do the men, somebody would do the women. So you could have 10 people to look after. Now people don't seem to be able to look after more than 1 or 2, but never mind. Then you go on set, you look after them, you take continuity shots. But again, people, hair and makeup and costume really should have psychology degrees, because you're the one that actually manages to get the actor on set half the time because they're all so insecure. I really enjoyed my days as a standby.
But then you made the leap to supervisor.
But at some point you have to kind of move up. So I became a wardrobe master on various jobs, then wardrobe supervisor on the last 2 Harry Potters, and then my first proper costume supervision job was Fast and Furious in 2012, Fast and Furious 6. Doing standby is, again, it's a massive responsibility to get everything right. Because if you mess up on continuity, it could mean reshooting a scene, and when you consider a day's filming on a big film can easily cost £250,000. So you've got to be on the ball. And it's a big jump from standby to supervisor. But being a wardrobe supervisor on Potter, Charlotte Finley was the costume supervisor, and we worked together so well as a team. And that was a great transition to becoming a fully fledged costume supervisor. I know now a lot of people want to move up through the ranks really quickly, but I feel unless you spend time on the floor learning the trade, you can't foresee imminent problems that with years of experience, we can.
And you've used both titles here, wardrobe supervisor and costume supervisor. What's the difference between the wardrobe supervisor and a costume supervisor?
Well, it depends on the size of the film. A costume supervisor, if it's a small film with very few crowd, it'll just be one costume supervisor. A costume supervisor basically oversees everything in the department, whereas a wardrobe supervisor will tend to deal mostly with the crowd, so fittings, get-ins, marquees, trucks, etc. And a good wardrobe supervisor on a big film will help take the stress away from the costume supervisor so they can focus more on the principles and the whole making process or rental procedure, as well as dealing with the costume designer, director and producers. So that's probably the biggest difference. The costume supervisor is ultimately in charge and the wardrobe supervisor is just below them, looking after more after the crowd.
And what to you what, in your opinion, makes a good supervisor? What are the crucial skills to be a good supervisor?
I think to be a good supervisor, you've got to have a good team at the end of the day. If you don't have a good team, you're only as good as the team you have. So with good ammunition, you can win the battle.
Richard will be so happy for a military analogy in here.
Well, I think you need to be organised. You need to be understanding. You're only as good as the team you have. So if you can put together a really good, solid team that, if you treat them well, they'll treat you well. It's all about respect. It's about give and take.
And that leads beautifully into one of the questions I wanted to ask, which was, how do you go about creating your team? Is it your responsibility to choose the team, or does that fall on the designer, or whose responsibility, and how do you do it?
It's a tricky one. Ultimately, it's your responsibility, but the costume designer will undoubtedly have people that they want to work with. So you have to kind of juggle the two and try and put together a team that will work together, because there's nothing worse than a team that is fighting each other. That's happened on occasion.
Never on a film set.
Well, which is why it's a difficult job putting together a good team, because some people give people things to do that they really aren't suited to. So as long as you have a loyal team, that you give them things that they know how to do or want to do, or if you want to learn. But there's nothing worse than trying to get someone to do something that they're rubbish at, because it just goes horribly wrong. But basically, I've worked with lots of people over the years, and I've got a great team of people that I love working with, but they're not always available because, I end up starting a job way before most people and finish after they do. So they can't wait around for months in the interim. So a lot of the time you fall out of sync. And times are changing now on productions. The amount of time, when you've got a shoot date and it's pushed by a month and then it's pushed by another month, but you've already employed these people or at least offered them work. So I get to the point where I don't actually offer people. I don't start looking until I know that we're definitely shooting, because there's so many times that you just say to people, I don't know what to say. It's going to be another month, and they're struggling to survive. So it's getting more and more difficult on that front.
And what's a normal day? Is there such a thing as a normal supervisor's day, an average working day?
Not really. I mean, to be honest, the prep on a film is always much more interesting than the actual shoot.
How come?
Well, it's just more exciting actually, just creating things and getting ready. Once you get into the shoot, it becomes, it gets more difficult, and you've got more things to juggle because you're still preparing. Whereas in theatre, you have a deadline, one deadline. So the opening night, everything has to be ready for that opening night. In film, every day is a new deadline. So you could have 80 deadlines. So you're just constantly juggling. But prep hours are normally a bit more human than the shooting hours as well, which is a bit nicer. I would, on a normal prep day, I'd start about 7. And we're currently on a project at Bray Studios, so that means leaving home at 6. And then after a spot of breakfast, you'd sit down with the costume designer and the assistant designers and go through what we've got to achieve that day, which could be anything from organising fabric samples from suppliers, organising outworkers, making costumes, visiting costume rental houses to pull costumes for big crowd scenes, or recceing locations to look at prospective spaces for dressing crowd, etc. But a lot of the job entails managing the budget, both purchase and rental costs, for both setting up the department and making and hiring costumes, and also labour costs and sorting out who'll be working in the department. On some films, you can have 100 people working in the costume department, and I've got to deal with employing all of those people. On top of those people, then you have to deal with employing an army of daily standbys who'll come in and dress on the big crowd days. So, and then there's normally a production meeting once a week, which can go on for hours. I hope to learn as much information from the powers that be in order to provide everything they want as quickly as cheaply as possible. But, it's not always possible to, the casting of actors is inevitably last minute, and script changes more and more. So, they can throw a department into turmoil at the drop of a hat. But just by, on the last job I did, the director decided that the 200 crowd that we bought all the costumes for and fitted them in a variety of bright colours needed to be dressed entirely white 2 weeks before we were due to shoot on them. So
it's an easy change to make.
And you're just like, on a whim.
To have the ability to have such whims.
And it's. The job of a costume supervisor, unfortunately, a few years back, the costume designer tended to be responsible for the budget, but now it seems to be almost solely the responsibility of the costume supervisor, which can be daunting when the costume budgets for these big budget movies can run between 5 and 10 million. So you're thinking, I didn't train as an accountant, but that seems to be a major part of our job now. So I think that's probably the worst bit about being a costume supervisor. You actually have very few dealings with costumes, and it's just about the money, really.
You've worked on some big productions, big films and big TV. What's the difference on, say, working on a Fast and Furious film versus working on a TV series like The Alienist?
You just get more time on a film. On a TV production, The Alienist, we had 10 hours. to produce, and on Fast and Furious, it's 2. So there's just more time on a film. And TV is great, but you're constantly on the go. I mean, we had 40,000 costumes we hired from 25 costume houses.
Wow.
So just getting those shipped from, we had UK, the US, Canada, France, Italy, Spain, Poland, Austria, just getting all of those over to, we were shooting in Budapest, so we had to get everything shipped there. And then at the end of the job, we had to sort it all out and ship it all back again, which was a bit of a nightmare. And in fact, I think we shipped, I think all your stuff came back, and literally the same day you got it back, they announced that they wanted to do reshoots. So we had to get half of it back again.
Yes.
So that was a
fun one of checking it in very, very quickly, or sitting there going, well, is there any point in checking it in? Can we just send it all back to you?
Exactly. I mean, that's the sort of the good old film producers logic. Sometimes you think, oh well. So yes, TV is great, and it's probably the way forward. I mean, especially in these times of box sets and Netflix and Amazon. But I think I probably prefer doing films, just because it's you get more time to spend on all the different elements.
And you've touched on there about the volume of costume houses that you work with. How important is it for you to do what you do to have good working relationships with the costume houses and the suppliers, like Angels as an example, but in general all of them?
Oh, it's essential. I mean, I mean, the American house is quite interesting. They can be a little trixier, shall we say? But I mean, so Angels, for example, been so invaluable over the years on the various projects I've worked on. I mean, you tend to hire mostly for period productions, although obviously you have a massive contemporary department. And we have had, I think, on The Mummy, we hired all the Bond crowd that you had. It's also a massive design resource for costume designers to pull from for concepts, and it's amazing what you come across when you're wandering around the aisles of Angel that you would never have thought of. And a lot of costume houses around the world specialize in certain eras or styles, and you'll ultimately, what happens is there's a Regency film, and then there's 4 or 5, or a Victorian film. They all happen at the same time. So you end up having to use costume houses all around the world because there aren't enough costumes to go around. But, Angels covers such a huge range that you'll always find something that suits. So, you were so helpful when we were doing The Alienist, because we were constantly going, oh God, we need this. Oh, we need this. And we were in Budapest. You was just sending stuff out. And actually, you ended up being one of the cheapest houses.
Don't say that. My father listens to this. Do you actually have a preference to is there how do you go about choosing what projects you work on? Do you have that luxury to be able to sit there and go, I've got these 2 or 3 offers, or do you even sit there and go, oh, I'd love to work on a Victorian, or do you not care what project you work on as long as you're working?
It's a kind of I much prefer doing period films. It's always much more enjoyable. The trouble is with contemporary jobs is that everybody's got an opinion. I mean, if with a period job, the directors and the producers tend to just go with what the designer wants because they've done the research, and there are only certain number of things. It is actually a period thing. It has happened, although some of the conversations you have with them are hilarious. But a modern film, everyone, the caterer's got an opinion, the grip's got an opinion, and they think it's easy. They just think, oh, it's just jeans and t-shirt. How can that be difficult? But there are thousands of different styles of jeans, and every actor knows that style that suits them, although it doesn't. So it's really hard with modern just to actually find things that everybody's going to be happy with. So yes, I would much rather do a period film. And again, there are designers that I love working with and designers that I don't. So you want to have a nice time.
And how don't we? We just want a happy film set, happy job.
Yeah.
How do you see the division of the work between the designer and what you do? What's that relationship like between a supervisor and a designer?
Well, I mean, you have to work really closely with the costume designer and with their assistants. I mean, you rely so heavily on a good assistant designer as they can make or break a team. The costume designer is always so busy with so many looks and concepts to achieve. So the assistant costume designer are there, eyes and ears, and they have to mop up after them after they've sort of gone through like a whirlwind and told all the cutters and makers and costume props people and break down what they want. So they have to be really on the ball, the assistants. But my job is to basically look at what the designer wants and to try and work out the most efficient way of achieving that look with the best result. And it doesn't necessarily always go smoothly. I mean, quite often they want something that we just can't afford to make. So you have to try and either rebudget elsewhere in order to give them exactly what they want, or try and come up with acceptable alternatives that are cheaper. I mean, there is a budget, and sometimes it's not always an easy job keeping designers within those restraints. But on a basic level, I'd say that the designer comes up with the concepts and the supervisor has to realise them, both by organising a crew of people to make them and by dividing up the budget available to achieve it.
That's a nice, very succinct way of looking at it. I've actually never heard someone actually ultimately that's what it is.
I mean, it's not an enviable task for the designer to come up with the designs. That can be torturous depending on who the director and producers are. I mean, as I said earlier, period films are easier in a way, but contemporary films can be a nightmare. But when we did 47 Ronin, trying to explain to the producers that we needed so many people for the dressing. The costumes that Penny did were, they were huge. There were these samurai things, but it took one standby, half an hour to dress one crowd member, and we had 600. And then you were like, okay, so just trying to do the maths, you were like, oh, this is going to take forever. So we ended up with an enormous crew that we had to train beforehand to actually teach them how to dress samurai warriors, because it wasn't easy.
No, I mean and those costumes were stunning that you guys had made for it, because I think we've only got 15 of the samurai from 47 Ronin, and they are incredible, and the layers on those it's crazy. And the weight as well.
So heavy.
I can't imagine having to dress them quickly. It's just an impossibility. They look fantastic, but they're incredible.
Well, we had a Japanese expert come over, but trying, you could see her just like, oh, can I just, and may I, and just then stripping the extra down and starting again. You were like, just teach us properly, because you can't do that when we've got 600 of them. It's going to take 3 days to dress them. But yes, so between us, we have to kind of realise, and sometimes what they want isn't achievable.
And are you the one who has to tell them that?
Yeah. Which doesn't always go well, but as long as you can come up with an alternative that's not, that's suitable, it might not be. But sometimes it's like, well, if you do that, then you can't have this. So eventually they do kind of go, oh, okay, because they realise that it's give and take.
Yeah, it's like the story of with Steve Jobs when the people at Apple were pitching designs to him or anything like that. They deliberately knew whatever they wanted to show him, or as an alternative to what he wanted, they could never show it to him first.
No.
They had to give him a few options to reject it, and then give them the one they wanted. Is it like that?
Yes, you always. It's very like that. Yes, but that kind of goes with the designers with the directors as well, because never show them the one that you want. It was like, show them something horrible first and hope that they don't go, yes, that's brilliant, and then you can go, oh, there's this, and then show them the fabulous thing, and then they'll go, oh yes, that's much better.
At least everyone uses the same trick on everyone else. It's good to hear.
Yes.
And just unfortunately, drawing this to a close, I think the final question I have for you is there a single piece of advice you would give to someone who wants to become a supervisor or wants to get into costume? Is there the Andrew Hunt advice to working in this industry?
Don't. No. But, or at least make sure your partner knows that they're going to become a wardrobe widow, as we call them. No, it's a really rewarding job, but it is stressful, and sometimes it feels like you can't please anybody, the designer, the producers, or your crew. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if we didn't love it, we wouldn't do it. But yeah, just learn to juggle. Really, that's probably the best advice.
It's amazing. There has not been a single doubling up of any of the advice given. So it is fantastic to hear that everyone has different advice to give, and that there's so much more. That there's so many aspects to it that people believe in and everything like that, but everyone just wants to sort of give the different advice. For me, it's just like everyone cares and everyone's juggle, learn how to multitask, and other people have said have passion, and it's amazing. Everything is amazing to listen to what people say and how they feel about the jobs. And the one thing that's come through in all of these is how much everyone enjoys what they do and they love what they do. And that clearly I know from our many phone conversations, especially in The Alienist, that it might be tiring for you, but you do enjoy it and you do love the final when it's all finished and everything, to be able to look back and look at what you did. And then I could be very wrong here, you do take a moment to enjoy it before you think about, okay, what comes next.
Yes, I mean, there's nothing more amazing than when you walk on set and you've got 800 extras there and on a huge set, and everything just looks amazing, and you just think, oh, we did that.
And as in Fast and Furious, they then bring the cars on.
And then they bring the cars on, yes. Yeah, not so much on Fast and Furious, yeah.
Well, look, Andrew, thank you so much for your time today. I really do appreciate it, and some great advice you've given. And again, another unique way of getting into the industry, and just shows there are so many ways in. And just if you keep you learn your craft, you work hard, and you make sure communication's good with people, you can that's what's needed in this industry. And thank you so much for telling us everything. Thank you.
Pleasure. I mean, I think basically, if you've got a good attitude and common sense, sometimes I do worry. Sometimes people that come out of colleges with degrees in costume design, they come out thinking they're a costume designer, but they're not. They've trained as a costume designer, but they've got to be willing to start at the bottom and give it 100%.
That's a really interesting thing that you say there, that came out on one of the other interviews with Shelley, who runs the training at Angels, which she said all these people come out as costume designers and they're not looking, or with a degree in costume design, but they don't look at the film and realize on a film there's one designer,
exactly,
there's maybe one assistant, and then there's an army of other people. Now, where do people need to fulfill the role? It's not in the ones, it's in the army, and they're all just as important, because as you've been saying, the team is so important.
Yeah, I mean, you are only as good as your team. So if you treat your team well, you'll get, brilliant work from them. But, there is only one costume designer. There's only one costume supervisor. And these the kids now are just like desperate to get to the top. And you're like, you need to do the hours. You need to do the work to get there. Because once you get there, there's nowhere else to go. I mean, that's the top.
Amazing. Andrew, thank you so much. Thank you.
Pleasure.
That was my conversation with Andrew. I found it amazing to listen to his description, as I keep saying, between a wardrobe and a costume supervisor, but I think he just does it so succinctly and clear that it really makes sense and allows you to see the difference.
Yeah, and a thoroughly nice and genuine guy as well.
It's fascinating, and that's part of the reason why we wanted to set up this podcast in the first place, because it was sort of, as Andrew's explained, it's to reveal the inner workings and to try and give some insight into how all the myriad roles that people can have within this one industry. Andrew, as you'll see from his biog, has had a career that's crossed over every medium: theatre, film, television, commercials, and it's a job, it's a career, a job, a profession, and to be the best at it, you need to understand every single aspect of it. And I think that's also very key with Andrew's chat, because he makes it very clear that the more information you have about any particular job, the better you can be at it. And it's beholden on you as the individual to amass as much information as you can in order that you can make decisions.
When I worked with him on The Alienist, they were phoning us pretty much weekly to get new things sent out, and it really was a bit of it was crazy for them, the amount of stock they were getting from everywhere and everyone, and the balls he has to juggle to keep on top of everything was crazy.
issue they sometimes have of identifying whose costumes are whom is always a bit of a contentious one.
Yeah.
I always say if it hasn't got a label in it, then it's ours.
It is interesting as well. I get from Andrews, where he started in theatre as well, and some other people started in theatre. I know a lot of people used to say starting in theatre is one of the best places to cut your teeth, but that seems to have changed. Well, not changed now, but that doesn't seem to be the routine for many people these days. Or do you both disagree with that?
No, I think theatre, theatre, of course, is notoriously badly paid, which is why, again, in another interview, somebody started in admin in the BBC and then saw what the designers were getting paid because they were doing timesheets and thought, hang on a moment, I'm in the wrong job. But theatre, I think, is probably, a good grounding because you're doing various productions on a fairly regular basis if you're staff and you're having to improvise and probably make do with not very much money. And it's all, if a zip breaks 3 minutes before the act is due to go on, you got 3 minutes to get it sorted.
You've also got to understand that theatre is much more of a nationwide medium, and for people that are not brought up and educated and living in London, in far-flung places of the UK, there is a theatre. There is an opportunity for people to realise their dreams in terms of working in the field of costume. And whether you live in Newcastle or Manchester or Southsea, there are theatres, and they are organisations that, whether they're receiving houses or producing houses, they offer a grounding and a route into the industry that is much less rarefied than the worlds of television and film.
Yes, and there's also, of course, I suppose there's school drama and there's amateur dramatics, which again is a good toe in the water way of getting into it.
We hope you enjoyed this interview with Andrew. Next up is Giles Gale, who is also a supervisor. He actually also is a designer as well. But Richard, you did that interview. How did that go?
It went very well indeed. Apart from the fact I forgot to press the record button for the first 10 minutes of it, but hey ho, I think we got it back. No, he's a very interesting man, and again a very thoughtful man. Knows his craft, has done his time, has some very very nice things to say about The Crown and Amy Roberts, and I enjoyed the interview very much.
Well, we hope you all enjoyed this interview, and we will give you now a small sample of Richard's interview with Giles, which will be coming up next.
If I press the record button.
Well, there is that as well.
A lot of the times you don't really get the appreciation of what you do because it's, you're talking about 300 crowd, and although the crowd are all dressed in 1980s or 1990s costumes that are kind of appropriate to where they are and what season it is, to a lot of the crew it kind of doesn't really register as something, especially on The Crown when there is so many of those scenes. I don't think people always realise how much has gone into it.